Imagine a secret so deep, so carefully guarded that the one who kept it chose not to hide it in the ground, but within the very structure of the institution he gave his life to. Picture a man held in high regard, who spent his last fading years making certain that a specific, unsettling truth would stay locked away, unreachable for decades after he was gone. This isn't a story of ghosts or spirits, but of something far more disturbing. The calculated removal of human lives, carried out by a mind convinced of its own virtue, and the long, difficult journey to uncover what he so desperately wanted to remain hidden. The answer to this mystery lay untouched for 40 years, a quiet promise of discovery until the right hands, motivated by an unrelenting curiosity, finally made use of it. The year was 1847 when Arthur Penhaligon first came to the respected Northwood Academy for Boys, located in the gentle hills of rural Massachusetts. He was a man of great intelligence, sharp humor, and an almost consuming focus on order. At the time, Northwood was a decent but somewhat declining institution, its reputation lessened by a string of small scandals and uneven academic results. Penhaligon, with his neat suits, careful speech, and a steady look that seemed to see right through the thoughts of those he spoke to, was viewed as its rescuer. He was given the role of master, a title he carried with the seriousness of a king. Penhaligon's plans for Northwood were ambitious, to make it a symbol of academic success and moral strength, a place where the sons of New England's most influential families would be shaped into leaders. He quickly began putting wide-ranging changes into action. New courses were brought in, stricter rules for behavior were put in place, and the academy's large grounds were carefully maintained, showing the exact order he expected inside its walls. Every part of the academy's operation came under his direct watch. He was someone who thought real progress could only come through total control and a flawless public image. His office, a large room looking out over the main courtyard, became the center of his influence. There, he kept careful records, student applications, academic results, reports on discipline, letters to parents, financial books, and even detailed logs of daily life at the academy. He had a strange interest in paperwork, believing that every event, every choice, every exchange, no matter how minor, should be written down, sorted, and kept safe. His handwriting, a neat, almost artistic script, filled many leather-bound books. He would often tell his younger tutors, "A well-run institution is built on a base of undeniable facts, carefully kept." Under Penhaligon's strict control, Northwood Academy thrived. Student numbers grew, academic awards piled up, and its graduates went on to top universities and influential jobs. The Academy's name became linked with excellence, proof of Penhaligon's steadfast commitment. Yet underneath this polished image of success, a quiet, almost unnoticeable change started to take place. The goal of a spotless reputation, once a way to an end, slowly became the end itself. Any break from the ideal, any possible mark on Northwood's perfect record, began to be seen not as a problem to solve, but as a flaw to remove. The Academy's groundskeeper, Silas Croft, a man as old and weathered as the ancient trees he looked after, watched these shifts with a quiet, knowing look. Silas had been at Northwood long before Penhaligon, seeing masters come and go with their short-lived ideas. He noticed the master's carefulness turn into an obsession, his focus on order harden into a strict set of rules. Silas, a man of few words, often stayed late, his lantern throwing long shadows as he moved through the quiet hallways, a silent observer of the Academy's change. He noticed the master's late visits to the infirmary, the soft conversations with the matron, and the occasional strange removal of certain student files from their usual spots. The mid-19th century in Massachusetts was a time of fast social change, but also of strict social expectations. For a place like Northwood, keeping a perfect reputation was essential. Wealthy families paid large sums for the promise of a refined education, and any sign of trouble, whether academic failure, moral issues, or even physical sickness, could cause ruin. Penhaligon understood this deeply. He believed the Academy's survival, and indeed its whole purpose, relied on showing an image of unbroken perfection. It started quietly with students seen as unsuitable for the Northwood ideal, not the openly defiant, but those whose presence might, in Penhaligon's view, harm the academy's carefully built image. There were children with learning difficulties, often misunderstood at the time as lacking intelligence. There were those from less wealthy families whose parents, through a scholarship or a donor, had managed to get them a place, but whose manners or looks didn't fit the upper-class mold. And then there were the children with long-term illnesses, whose extended stays in the infirmary might imply a lack of proper care, or worse, a risk of sickness spreading. The first cases were rare, easily explained. A student, young Alara Thorne, an orphan whose scholarship was sponsored by a distant relative, was noted in her early records as having a weak constitution. She was a quiet, artistic girl, prone to sadness. After a particularly harsh winter, her name simply disappeared from the student list. Her file, once full, was cut down to a single brief note, withdrawn due to ongoing ill health, returned to guardian. No guardian was ever named, no address given. It was the first time Silas Croft noticed a file vanish from the master's office, only to come back later, noticeably thinner. Then came Caleb Hayes, a lively boy from a farming family whose scholarship was a sign of his natural intelligence, but whose wild nature and occasional fights with other students were a constant annoyance to Penhaligon. Caleb was often in the infirmary not for illness, but for small injuries from his adventurous stunts. One spring, after a particularly bold prank that broke a window, Caleb was kept in the infirmary for a week. When he came out, he wasn't sent back to his dorm. His file too was eventually cleared out, replaced by a short entry, expelled for unmanageable behavior, sent to family. Again, no details, no contact. Silas saw the master himself carrying a small, heavy trunk out the back gate one evening, with a silent, unknown figure. These weren't isolated events. Over the years, a pattern began to show. Students seen as troublesome, whether due to health, character, or social background, would spend more and more time in the infirmary. The infirmary, under the strict matron Agnes Miller, became a kind of waiting place. Matron Miller, a woman whose face seemed forever marked with disapproval, was fiercely loyal to Penhaligon. She saw herself as someone who upheld the academy's standards, and if a child didn't meet those standards, she believed it was her job to help with their removal, however gently it was described. The records of these children, once carefully kept, would slowly get thinner. Pages would be taken out, entries changed, and eventually whole files would vanish from the main archives, only to turn up in a separate unmarked book kept in Penhaligon's private study. The master, with his careful hand, would then create a new, cleaned-up story for the official records, transferred, withdrawn, returned to family. The truth, however, was far more complicated and far more disturbing. Before we go on with the story of Northwood Academy and the secrets it held, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten histories and chilling mysteries from the past. Not everyone at Northwood Academy was blind to the master's methods. The staff, a small, close group, lived near each other, and secrets, no matter how well kept, had a way of slipping through the old stone walls. Matron Agnes Miller, while involved, was not entirely without her own inner conflicts. Her infirmary logs, though carefully arranged for official review, contained small differences, hidden notes, and an unusual number of entries marked private consultation with Master Penhaligon. She saw the children, their fear, their confusion. But her loyalty to Penhaligon and her belief in the Academy's purpose outweighed her conscience. She thought she was doing what was needed for the greater good of the institution. Thomas Finch, a young idealistic junior tutor who joined Northwood in the early 1860s, was one of the first to truly question the disappearances. He was assigned to teach Latin and Greek, and quickly grew fond of his students. He noticed the absence of certain boys from his classes, boys he had found particularly bright or interesting. He asked about them, only to be met with vague answers from Matron Miller or a dismissive wave from Penhaligon. A weak constitution, Mr. Finch, not suited for the demands of Northwood, or a family issue, tutor, best not to ask. Finch, however, was not easily put off. He began to compare his class lists with the official student roster. He saw the differences. He noticed the names of boys who had been there for weeks, even months, suddenly gone without a trace. He once overheard a quiet conversation between Matron Miller and Penhaligon. Words like disposal, arrangement, and quiet transport drifting through the thin walls of the staff quarters. The chilling realization slowly came to him. These children weren't simply withdrawn. They were being taken away. One evening, driven by growing unease, Finch went into the master's office after Penhaligon had gone to bed. He knew the master's careful habits, the exact placement of every book. He found the private ledger, a plain, unassuming book bound in dark fabric, tucked away behind a row of financial records. Inside, he found a chilling list of names, each with a short, clinical note. Elara Thorne, transferred to St. Jude's Home for Wayward Girls, Boston, 1855. Caleb Hayes, placed with Farming Family, Vermont, 1858. Lydia Shaw, sent to Asylum, Worcester, 1862. The entries were cold and factual, detailing the fates of children who had simply stopped existing within Northwood's official story. Finch was horrified. He confronted Penhaligon, but the master, with a chilling calm, dismissed his concerns as young idealism and a misunderstanding of what institutions required. Finch resigned shortly after, unable to match his conscience with the Academy's dark secret. He carried the weight of what he knew for the rest of his life, a quiet testament to the master's hidden actions. Martha Higgins, a quiet woman who worked in the Academy kitchens for decades, also had her own observations. She saw the children come and go, their faces often pale and withdrawn after time in the infirmary. She remembered the special plain meals she was sometimes asked to prepare for sensitive stomachs, meals that often went uneaten. She recalled the late-night departures, the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel drive long after curfew, and the master's stern, unblinking presence overseeing these secret movements. Martha, a woman of simple faith, often prayed for the children she no longer saw, her heart heavy with unspoken questions. She never spoke of what she saw, afraid for her job, but the images stayed with her. By the late 1880s, Arthur Penhaligon was a shadow of his former self. The once powerful master, now in his late 70s, was weak. His sharp mind was dulled by age and illness. His body was failing, but his mind, though sometimes unclear, remained fiercely protective of his life's work and its darkest secrets. He knew his time was short, and with that knowledge came a renewed, almost desperate urgency to protect his legacy, to make sure the truth of Northwood's hidden shadows would stay buried. His obsession with documentation, which had once been used to create a perfect facade, now turned inward, becoming a desperate attempt to control the story even after his death. He spent endless hours in his study, surrounded by his private ledgers, his journals, and the cleared files of the removed children. He carefully arranged them, tying them in heavy fabric, sealing them with wax, and labeling them with secret codes only he understood. He was getting them ready for their final resting place. The place he chose was as meaningful as it was secure, a forgotten basement beneath the Academy's oldest wing. A space once used for storing coal, now largely unused and reachable only through a narrow hidden passage behind a false wall in the master's private rooms. It was here that Penhaligon, with the reluctant help of Silas Croft, began the difficult work of building his vault. Silas, now a man in his 60s, had served Penhaligon for over 40 years. He had seen the master's change, the slow loss of his humanity in the constant pursuit of institutional perfection. He had seen the children vanish, had heard the whispers, and had carried the weight of his silent involvement for decades. Penhaligon, weakened by his illness, directed Silas with a feverish intensity. He demanded a vault of solid stone, reinforced with iron bars and secured by a complex custom-made lock. Silas, his face showing no emotion, chipped away at the old stone, mixed mortar, and hauled heavy iron, his movements slow and careful. He knew what was being hidden, and a deep sense of dread came over him with each stone placed, each bar secured. He often wondered if the master was trying to bury his wrongdoings or simply keep them safe in a place where no one could ever judge him. One cold autumn evening, as the last of the heavy boxes were lowered into the newly finished vault, Penhaligon handed Silas a small, ornate brass key. "This key, Silas," he said hoarsely, his voice weak and strained, "is for the vault. It is to stay with you, and then with your successor, for 40 years. No one, not the trustees, not the faculty, not even my own family, is to know of its existence or of what it guards. Swear to me, Silas, that you will protect this secret, that you will keep Northwood's legacy intact." Silas, his eyes meeting the master's intense stare, simply nodded, the weight of the key feeling impossibly heavy in his rough hand. He did not swear, but his silence was taken as agreement. He then sealed the false wall, hiding the entrance to the vault, leaving no sign it existed. A few weeks later, Arthur Penhaligon died quietly in his sleep, his secret seemingly safe forever. The Academy mourned its visionary leader, celebrating his legacy of excellence, unaware of the dark truth he had so carefully buried beneath their feet. The brass key, cold and heavy, became Silas Croft's quiet companion. For 40 years, it stayed hidden, first in a small leather pouch sewn into the lining of his work coat, then as he aged, tucked under a loose floorboard in his small cottage on the Academy grounds. He never spoke of it, not to his wife, not to his children, not even to the new groundskeepers who eventually came to help him. The weight of Penhaligon's secret was a constant presence, a shadow that stretched across his days and haunted his nights. Northwood Academy continued to succeed, its reputation strengthened by Penhaligon's long time in charge. New masters came and went, each leaving their own mark, but none had the same intense focus on documentation as Penhaligon. The Academy's archives grew, but the precise, almost clinical records from the Penhaligon era remained a standard, proof of his administrative skill. No one suspected that a significant part of those records, the most damaging ones, lay hidden in a forgotten vault. Silas, now a very old man, his back bent from years of labor, finally passed the key to his grandson, young Thomas Croft, who had taken over his duties as groundskeeper. "This key," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible, "was given to me by Master Penhaligon. He made me promise to keep it hidden for 40 years. That time is nearly up. When it is, you must give it to the trustees. Tell them it unlocks a vault beneath the old wing. Tell them it holds the true history of Northwood." Thomas, confused but respectful, took the key, feeling the strange, cold weight of a secret he did not yet understand. He promised his grandfather he would keep his word. The Academy itself changed slowly over these decades. The strict Victorian values of Penhaligon's time gradually gave way to the more progressive ideas of the early 20th century. The infirmary, once a place of quiet fear, became a modern health center. The curriculum expanded, embracing new sciences and arts. But the old buildings, with their thick stone walls and echoing hallways, kept a certain seriousness, a sense of history that seemed to hum with untold stories. Rumors, of course, continued. Whispers of Penhaligon's odd habits, of his late-night work, of certain students who simply vanished, but these were dismissed as old tales, the imaginings of staff long gone. The official story, carefully shaped by Penhaligon himself, remained unchallenged. The Academy's history books showed an institution built on honesty and academic discipline, a legacy untouched by scandal. The key, however, held a different story, a story that was about to be unlocked. The year is 1930. The world has changed greatly since Penhaligon's death. The Great War had reshaped nations, and the roaring 1920s had given way to the harsh realities of the Great Depression. Northwood Academy, while still prestigious, faced new challenges. Financial pressures grew, and the need for modernization became increasingly clear. It was in this setting that Elias Vance, a sharp and practical businessman, was appointed to the Board of Trustees. Vance, a graduate of Northwood himself, was determined to ensure the Academy's survival and continued relevance. Vance quickly saw the need to organize and digitize the Academy's large archives. The sheer amount of paper records collected over nearly a century was overwhelming. He hired a young, bright archivist named Eleanor Reed. Eleanor was a woman ahead of her time, sharp-witted, methodical, and with an almost natural sense for historical documents. She approached her work with quiet enthusiasm, eager to bring order to the messy piles of ledgers, letters, and student files. Eleanor found the Penhaligon era particularly interesting. The master's carefulness was legendary, and his records were a rich source of information about 19th-century education and society. She admired his neat handwriting, his detailed financial accounts, and the large amount of his correspondence. Yet, even in her early days, a subtle unease began to grow. She noticed the occasional gap in student records, the sudden end of a file, or a strangely vague note about a student's departure. These were small oddities, easy to ignore, but they bothered her archivist's instinct for completeness. It was during a routine check of the Academy's older buildings that Thomas Croft, the groundskeeper, finally approached Elias Vance. Thomas, now a man in his late 50s, had carried his grandfather's secret for years. He felt the weight of the promise, the unspoken burden of the key. He handed the ornate brass key to Vance, explaining his grandfather's final wish, the 40-year period, and the puzzling instruction to find a vault beneath the old wing. Vance, initially doubtful, was curious. The story, though strange, had a sense of truth to it, a quiet seriousness in Thomas's voice. Eleanor, upon hearing of the key and the rumored vault, was immediately fascinated. Her archivist's mind, always looking for the missing piece of a puzzle, saw the potential for a historical discovery of huge importance. She joined Vance and Thomas in their search for the hidden entrance. They searched the old wing, tapping on walls, checking blueprints until finally, behind a crumbling section of plaster in what was once Penhaligon's private study, they found it, a faint outline of a false wall, almost perfectly hidden. The air in the narrow passage behind it was thick with dust and the musty smell of forgotten time. The moment of discovery was charged with a clear tension. Elias Vance, a man of logic and reason, felt an unusual sense of anticipation. Eleanor Reed, usually composed, found her heart beating faster. Thomas Croft, who had carried the key and its secret for so long, felt a deep sense of relief and unease. The false wall, once uncovered, led to a short, damp passage that ended at a heavy iron-bound door. The air was cold, still, and carried the faint metallic smell of old iron, along with the deep earthy scent of undisturbed soil. The lock, a complex mechanism of brass and steel, was clearly custom-made. Thomas handed the key to Vance, who, taking a deep breath, put it into the keyhole. The tumblers clicked with a series of sharp, echoing sounds in the tight space. With a final, heavy thud, the lock opened. Vance grabbed the cold iron handle and pulled. The door, stiff from decades of disuse, groaned on its hinges, releasing a puff of ancient, stale air that smelled of mildew, decaying paper, and something else, something hard to name that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Inside, the vault was a small, rectangular chamber, carefully built from rough-cut stone. It was completely dark, a void that seemed to swallow the light from their lanterns. As Vance raised his lantern higher, the light cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of canvas-bound boxes, neatly placed on sturdy wooden shelves along the walls. The boxes, though covered in a thick layer of dust, looked perfectly preserved. The air was heavy, oppressive, and strangely quiet, as if the atmosphere itself had been holding its breath for 40 years. Eleanor stepped forward, her archivist's curiosity overcoming her initial hesitation. She ran a gloved hand over the top of one of the boxes. The canvas was rough, the wax seals still intact. Penhaligon's careful, almost obsessive need for order was clear even in this hidden tomb. Vance, meanwhile, examined the lock, the door, the construction of the vault. He went to extraordinary lengths, he murmured, to keep whatever is in here hidden. Thomas Croft stood silently at the entrance, his face unreadable. The weight of his grandfather's secret finally lifted, replaced by a new, unsettling anticipation. The first box Eleanor opened held a set of ledgers, identical in size and binding to the official Academy records, but unmarked. As she carefully turned the brittle pages, her eyes widened. These were not financial records, Nor were they standard student files. They were personal journals, carefully kept by Arthur Penhaligon himself, detailing his thoughts, his decisions, and his justifications for actions that were beginning to feel deeply troubling. The first entry she read, dated 1854, sent a chill through her. The integrity of Northwood is paramount. A weak constitution such as young Alara Thorne's cannot be allowed to compromise the strong image we work to present. Her sadness, her frequent illnesses are a drain on resources and a possible source of risk, both physical and moral. A quiet arrangement is required. The records must show a simple withdrawal. The truth in such matters is often an obstacle to progress. Eleanor looked up, her face pale. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I think we have found something far more significant than old financial records." The vault became Eleanor's focus. For weeks, she worked tirelessly, carefully listing the contents, her initial excitement slowly giving way to a growing sense of dread. Elias Vance joined her when his trustee duties allowed. His initial doubt replaced by a grim resolve. Thomas Croft, the groundskeeper, often stood by the entrance, a quiet guardian, his presence a constant reminder of the secret his family had kept for so long. The vault contained not only Penhaligon's personal journals, but also a large collection of cleared student files, infirmary logs with changed entries, and a set of cryptic financial ledgers that seemed to track spending for special arrangements and quiet transport. The sheer amount of documentation was astonishing, proof of Penhaligon's obsessive need to record everything, even the very acts of removal. Eleanor began by comparing the names in Penhaligon's private journals with the official Academy records. The differences were immediate and clear. Names that appeared in the journals with details about arrangements and transfers were completely missing from the official student lists for those years. Other names had official entries that were vague, incomplete, or simply stopped suddenly with no forwarding information. One of the first full files Eleanor rebuilt was that of Alara Thorne. The official record stated a simple withdrawal due to ill health. But in the vault, Eleanor found Alara's original application, her early academic reports, which were quite good, and a series of increasingly concerned letters from her distant relative, a Mrs. Harriet Finch, inquiring about Alara's long stay in the infirmary. Then a final short letter from Penhaligon to Mrs. Finch, stating Alara had been transferred to a specialized institution better suited to her weak condition. There was no mention of St. Jude's Home for Wayward Girls, as noted in Penhaligon's journal. The official letter was a carefully built lie. Excerpt from Penhaligon's journal, October 1855, "The Thorne girl's sad disposition is proving harmful to the spirits of the other students. Her constant need for attention, her fragile health are a burden. St. Jude's is a fitting solution. It is a place where such children can be managed without drawing unwanted attention to Northwood. The story must be one of caring transfer, not institutional failure." Vance, reading over Eleanor's shoulder, felt a cold tightness in his stomach. "He didn't just remove them, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "He rewrote their entire existence. If this story is giving you chills, imagine the real-life secrets that lie hidden in forgotten archives. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's most unsettling mysteries." As Eleanor looked deeper, the individual cases began to form a disturbing pattern. It wasn't just a few isolated events. It was a systematic, calculated process of removal. Penhaligon had developed a chillingly effective system for identifying, separating, and ultimately getting rid of any student who threatened the Academy's perfect image. The infirmary under Matron Agnes Miller played a key role in this process. Eleanor found Matron Miller's original infirmary logs, hidden under a false bottom in one of the boxes. These logs, unlike the cleaned-up versions in the official archives, contained detailed, often troubling observations. They spoke of children being kept alone for weeks, sometimes months, under vague diagnoses like nervous weakness, moral deficiency, or unspecified illness. The entries often ended with a note, "Master Penhaligon consulted, disposition pending." One such case was Lydia Shaw, a bright but shy girl who arrived at Northwood in 1861. Her file in the vault revealed she was an illegitimate child, her enrollment arranged through the quiet support of a wealthy anonymous donor. Penhaligon's journal entries about Lydia were particularly harsh. He saw her very existence as a potential scandal, a social problem that could damage Northwood's reputation if her background ever became known. Excerpt from Penhaligon's journal, April 1862. The Shaw girl shows an unfortunate tendency towards sadness, a trait no doubt inherited from her unfortunate circumstances. Her presence here is a constant reminder of the moral looseness that troubles society. She is a risk. Matron Miller reports she is increasingly withdrawn. A transfer to Worcester Asylum under the pretense of specialized care for her nervous condition is the most sensible path. The records will show a simple withdrawal due to family matters. Lydia Shaw, a child of 10, was sent to an asylum. Her only offense was her birth and her quiet nature. Her official record simply stated, "withdrawn by family." Eleanor felt a wave of sickness. The cold, bureaucratic language of Penhaligon's journals made the cruelty even more stark. The financial ledgers in the vault also told a grim story. They contained entries for transportation services, special care arrangements, and donations to charitable institutions that went far beyond any legitimate expenses. These were the hidden costs of Penhaligon's dispositions, the payments made to ensure the silence of those who helped with the children's removal, and to the institutions that took them in. The Academy's official financial records, of course, showed no such spending, the costs cleverly hidden within broader categories. Vance, his face grim, began to understand the true scale of Penhaligon's obsession. He wasn't just protecting the Academy's reputation, Eleanor, he said, pacing in the cramped vault. He was protecting his own vision of it. He saw these children as flaws, marks on his perfect creation, and he believed he had the right, even the duty, to remove them. The more Eleanor and Vance uncovered, the deeper the darkness seemed to go. Each new file, each journal entry painted a more complete and horrifying picture of Penhaligon's methods. They found evidence of children being sent to workhouses under false pretenses, to distant relatives who were paid to take them in, and in some of the most disturbing cases, to institutions for the feeble-minded or morally deficient, regardless of their actual condition. One such case was Samuel Oakhaven, a boy who arrived at Northwood in 1870. Samuel was a quiet, gentle child, but he struggled academically. He was slower to understand concepts, often lost in his own thoughts. Penhaligon in his journals labeled him uneducable and a harm to the intellectual environment of the Academy. Excerpt from Penhaligon's journal, November 1871. The Oakhaven boy continues to be a deep disappointment. His inability to grasp even the simplest ideas is a waste of the tutor's time and a source of embarrassment. He is not merely slow, he is fundamentally lacking. His presence here weakens the very purpose of Northwood. A placement at the county poor farm, where his labor can be used, is a more practical solution than trying to force an education on a mind unable to receive it. His parents, with limited means, will be told of his transfer to a vocational program. Samuel Oakhaven, a child who simply learned at a different pace, was condemned to a life of hard labor at a poor farm, his potential destroyed, his time at Northwood erased. His parents, likely desperate and trusting, were given a lie. Eleanor wept as she read this entry. The cold, clinical detachment of Penhaligon's words was a sharp contrast to the human tragedy they described. They also found a series of letters from former matron Agnes Miller, written to Penhaligon after she retired. These letters, filled with a strange mix of loyalty and hidden regret, hinted at her involvement. In one letter dated 1885, she wrote, "Master Penhaligon, I hope you are well. I often think of the difficult choices we made for the good of the Academy. The children, I hope they found peace. My conscience, though quieted by duty, sometimes stirs, but I remind myself of the necessity, the greater good. You always knew what was best for Northwood." This was not a confession, but a chilling confirmation of the systematic nature of the removals. Agnes Miller, like Penhaligon, had convinced herself that her actions were justified a necessary evil for the preservation of the institution. The moral compromises, the willful blindness, had become part of the Academy's very fabric during Penhaligon's long time in charge. The vault's contents revealed a conspiracy of silence and involvement that went beyond Penhaligon and Matron Miller. While no other staff members were directly part of the dispositions, many were vaguely aware, choosing to look away, to not ask questions, to keep their positions within the prestigious Academy. The fear of Penhaligon's disapproval, the desire to maintain the Academy's reputation, and the prevailing social attitudes of the 19th century all contributed to this shared blindness. The historical context of the era was crucial to understanding how such a system could function. In the mid to late 19th century, institutions for wayward children, the feeble-minded, and the poor were common. These places were often overcrowded, underfunded, and operated with little oversight. Children seen as undesirable by society, whether due to poverty, illegitimacy, disability, or simply a perceived lack of conformity, were often taken from their families or communities and placed in these institutions, effectively disappearing from public view. Penhaligon exploited this system, using it as a convenient tool to maintain Northwood's purity. The Academy's architecture itself, with its sprawling wings, hidden passages, and isolated infirmary, helped keep things secret. The long winding hallways, the heavy oak doors, the sense of being a self-contained world all contributed to an environment where certain truths could be easily hidden. Silas Croft, the groundskeeper, had been an unwitting accomplice. His silence bought by loyalty and fear. His actions driven by a sense of duty to the master, however misguided. Eleanor and Vance also found a series of letters from Thomas Finch, the junior tutor who had resigned decades earlier. These letters, addressed to a distant cousin, detailed his growing unease and his eventual departure from Northwood. In one letter dated 1865, Finch wrote, "Cousin, I cannot stay at Northwood. The master's methods, though dressed in the language of institutional need, are deeply troubling. Children vanish, not through death, but through a kind of bureaucratic disappearance. Their names are erased, their stories rewritten. My conscience will not allow me to be part of such a deception. I fear for the souls of those who remain silent." Finch's letters were a powerful testament to the moral struggle faced by those who glimpsed the truth. His resignation, once seen as a sign of weakness, was now revealed as an act of deep integrity. The conspiracy was not one of open cruelty, but of institutional self-preservation, fueled by fear, ambition, and a chilling disregard for individual human lives. As Eleanor and Vance pieced together the fragments of Penhaligon's life and his hidden actions, a complex and disturbing picture of the man emerged. Arthur Penhaligon was not a sadist, nor was he driven by personal hatred. His cruelty was far more insidious. It came from an unwavering, almost pathological devotion to an ideal. He saw Northwood Academy not just as a school, but as a sacred duty, a stronghold of order and excellence in a world he saw as chaotic and imperfect. His journals revealed a man deeply insecure about the Academy's standing, constantly fearing scandal, financial trouble, or any perceived mark on its reputation. He believed that any student who didn't fit the mold, who presented a problem whether through illness, character, or social background, was a direct threat to this sacred ideal. He saw himself as a surgeon, cutting out diseased tissue to save the health of the whole. His careful record-keeping, initially a tool for efficiency, became a means of control, a way to carefully create a false reality, to erase inconvenient truths. Excerpt from Penhaligon's journal, December 1878, "The weight of leadership is immense. One must make difficult choices, choices that lesser men would avoid. But the future of Northwood, its very soul, depends on keeping a flawless surface. Sentimentality is a weakness. The greater good requires a firm hand, a clear vision, and the courage to remove what threatens the structure." He genuinely believed he was acting in the best interests of the Academy, and by extension, in the best interests of society. His moral compass had become so twisted by his obsession with institutional perfection that he had lost sight of the individual humanity of the children he so coldly disposed of. He saw them not as people with hopes and fears, but as data points, as potential liabilities, as problems to be solved. His final act, the sealing of the vault, was not an act of regret, but a final desperate attempt to control the story, to ensure that his carefully built legacy remained intact, even if the truth lay buried beneath it. Eleanor found herself grappling with the chilling logic of Penhaligon's madness. It wasn't the work of a monster, but of a man consumed by an idea, a man who had sacrificed human empathy at the altar of institutional pride. Vance, a man of business, understood the pressures Penhaligon faced, but could not reconcile them with the systematic removal of children. He was a product of his time, Eleanor, Vance mused, but he took the prevailing attitudes to a terrifying extreme. With the full scope of Penhaligon's actions laid bare, Eleanor and Vance set out on a new, more somber phase of their investigation, trying to trace the fates of the hidden children. This was a huge task, full of dead ends and heartbreaking discoveries. The records in the vault provided names and initial dispositions, but the trail often went cold quickly. They began by contacting the institutions mentioned in Penhaligon's journals: St. Jude's Home for Wayward Girls, Worcester Asylum, various county poor farms, and even distant orphanages. Many of these institutions had long since closed, their own records either lost to time or carefully guarded. The few that remained often had incomplete or contradictory information, reflecting the chaotic and often inhumane nature of such places in the 19th century. Eleanor, with her careful research skills, painstakingly compared names, dates, and locations. She found that Elara Thorne, the weak constitution, had indeed been admitted to St. Jude's, but her stay was short. A later entry indicated a transfer to a foster family in rural Maine, but no contact information was given. The trail ended there, leaving Elara's final fate a haunting mystery. Caleb Hayes, the unruly boy, was harder to trace. The farming family in Vermont mentioned in Penhaligon's journal proved hard to find. After weeks of searching, Vance discovered a small, faded newspaper clipping from a Vermont paper dated 1865, reporting the death of a young boy named Caleb, who had died of a fever while working on a farm. The details were sparse, but the age matched. It was a grim confirmation, a life cut short, far from the promise of Northwood. Lydia Shaw's fate was perhaps the most tragic. Records from Worcester Asylum confirmed her admission. She remained there for over 20 years, her condition described as chronic sadness and withdrawal. She died in the asylum in 1883, never having left its walls. Eleanor found a single faded drawing among Lydia's few possessions in the asylum's archives, a rough sketch of Northwood Academy seen from a distance, a small, lonely figure standing at its gates. It was a heartbreaking testament to a lost childhood. Samuel Oakhaven, sent to the county poor farm, was also confirmed to have lived out his days there, doing manual labor until his death in 1901. His life, too, was a testament to the devastating consequences of Penhaligon's cold calculations. The investigation was emotionally draining for both Eleanor and Vance. Each discovery, each confirmed fate, was a blow. Eleanor, in particular, felt a deep connection to these lost children, their voices finally being heard through the documents she uncovered. Vance, a man who had always believed in the inherent goodness of institutions, found his faith shaken to its core. The perfect image of Northwood, his alma mater, was irreparably shattered. The revelation of Penhaligon's vault and its contents sent shockwaves through the Northwood Academy Board of Trustees. Elias Vance, armed with Eleanor's carefully prepared report, presented the findings in a private meeting. The initial reaction was disbelief, then anger, and finally a deep sense of shame. The Academy's carefully built legacy, built over decades, was now exposed as a cover, hiding a dark and systematic cruelty. The trustees faced a painful decision: to hide the findings and protect the Academy's reputation, or to reveal the truth and face the inevitable scandal. Vance, however, was firm. "We cannot bury this again," he declared, his voice steady. Penhaligon did that for 40 years. Our duty is to these children, to their memory, and to the integrity of this institution, however painful the truth may be. After a heated discussion, the board ultimately voted to acknowledge the findings. A public statement was written, carefully worded to express regret and a commitment to openness without exaggerating the details. The news, when it came out, was a devastating blow to Northwood's reputation. Newspapers across Massachusetts carried headlines about the Northwood scandal and the master's hidden shame. Former students, alumni, and the wider academic community reacted with a mix of shock, anger, and deep sadness. The Academy went through a period of intense self-reflection and change. New policies were put in place to ensure the well-being of all students, and a dedicated fund was set up in memory of the hidden children, aimed at helping vulnerable young people in the community. The infirmary was completely renovated, its practices updated, and its staff retrained. The very spirit of Northwood began to shift, moving away from Penhaligon's rigid pursuit of perfection toward a more compassionate and inclusive approach to education. Eleanor Reed, the young archivist, found herself at the center of a historical storm. Her work was praised, but the emotional cost was huge. She continued her research, driven by a quiet determination to give a voice to every child Penhaligon had silenced. Elias Vance, though weary, felt a sense of moral vindication. He had honored his duty not just to the Academy, but to the truth. Thomas Croft, the groundskeeper, watched the events unfold with quiet satisfaction. His grandfather's secret, the heavy key, had finally served its purpose. The truth, however painful, had been brought to light. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that the children his grandfather had silently mourned were finally being remembered. The Northwood Academy scandal of the 1930s became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked institutional power and the harmful nature of secrecy. Yet, even with the vault's contents revealed and the Academy's past acknowledged, some questions lingered, echoing through the now empty corridors of the old wing. What was the ultimate fate of every single child Penhaligon had disposed of? While Eleanor and Vance had traced many, some trails remained cold, lost to time and the deliberate destruction of records. Were there descendants of Alara Thorne or Caleb Hayes, living their lives, unaware of the hidden chapter in their family history, unaware of the injustice that had shaped their ancestors' fates? And what of Penhaligon himself? Was his final act of sealing the vault truly an attempt to preserve his legacy? Or was there a deeper, more complex motivation? Did a flicker of regret, a shadow of doubt cross his mind in his final days, prompting him to leave the key, knowing that one day the truth might be found? Or was it merely a final desperate act of control, a perverse desire to ensure that even his secrets would outlive him, a testament to his meticulous, if twisted, genius? The vault, now empty of its damning contents, remained a stark monument to the past. Its cold stone walls, once guardians of a terrible secret, now stood as a silent witness to the power of truth, however long it takes to emerge. The story of Arthur Penhaligon and the hidden children of Northwood Academy serves as a chilling reminder that history is not always what is officially recorded, and that sometimes the most terrifying truths are found not in the supernatural but in the depths of human ambition, fear, and the silent complicity of institutions. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Penhaligon was a monster or a man tragically misguided by his devotion to an ideal? Leave your comments below and share your theories on the true motivations behind the master who locked his own records.